Predict, pick, and prevail in your fantasy football leagues with Nick Giacobbe and Nick Cap. From breakouts to busts, superstars to sleepers, these are the guys that will help you achieve fantasy glory. This is the PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast.
Welcome everybody to Season 2, Episode 81 of the PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast, where we give you our predictions, our picks, with the hopes that we help you prevail in the 2023 fantasy football season. I'm your host, Nick Giacobbe. Joining me is Nick Cap. Nick, we haven't spoken about 2 weeks, at least in front of a camera. 2 rounds of the NFL playoffs have happened. We have our awards to give out on this show for the 2022 season, and it's a lot of good stuff to talk about. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it should be a fun episode. You know, we usually have our weekly schedule, but this time we got to go a little bit off script and talk about our favorite moments of the season, really.
Yeah, our favorite, least favorite, players that we despise, players that we like. Little accountability for some of our takes, a little patting on the back for some of our takes. It's going to be a lot of fun. So with that said, during the season, you could find this show on all audio streaming platforms 5 times a week. The first 4 are Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, then a live show on Sundays. Like I said, all audio streaming platforms, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Anchor. If you want to listen to the show on Spotify or iTunes, I want you to give that 5-star rating and a review. We'd really appreciate that. It does help grow the show and boost our numbers, so please do that. If you'd rather watch and listen to the show, go to our YouTube channel, PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, like any video that you watch. If you're watching this video, make sure you like that. Share that link with your friends. Share the YouTube channel. It's the best place to grow our content and to grow our channel. During the offseason, make sure you tap into social media with the PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast. Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter is PrimeTimeFFPod. Facebook and YouTube is PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast. I promise we will have the TikTok up and running. We're going to figure out a plan during the offseason. I know it's the offseason, but probably maybe around the NFL draft or maybe free agency, see how crazy that stuff gets. And we'll see the type of content that we can give you guys. So like I said, normally during the season, it's 4 times a week plus the live show. During the off season, it's going to be once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks, depending on our schedule. So let's get right into it with our NFL playoff takeaways. And you could go to any show and listen about the NFL playoffs. You can watch ESPN, you can watch NFL Network, etc. So we're not really going to talk about each game per se, but what we're going to do is we're going to get our biggest fantasy takeaway from that game. And then we'll talk about how it can kind of affect the 2023 fantasy football season. And obviously, we haven't had free agency. We haven't had the draft, haven't had trades, etc. So a lot can change. But just from what our eyes saw, we'll tell you what we're thinking. So first game, my beloved Seattle Seahawks were in the playoffs, and they exceeded all expectations. So I'm not upset. But they did get demolished by the 49ers. It was pretty messy. At least the second half was. But Nick, what was your biggest takeaway from this game from a fantasy perspective?
I mean, it's hard to say for fantasy because, you know, it's a one-off type of game, but it is a division matchup. We've seen this game 3 times, and I feel like for all 3 games, we've seen inconsistency from Seattle, and we've seen very consistent football from San Francisco. My big takeaway is before the year, I said San Francisco was going to the Super Bowl, and it's because of the talent out there. And I think with Brock Purdy, they already pretty much said that he's going to be the starting quarterback next year. I think with that quarterback and that crew and that coach, I think you got a lot of consistency, and I don't think there's any reason to fade that San Fran offense. This past year, we ranked our top 5 teams where we said, you know, these are the guys we want to get. I don't see how San Francisco doesn't end up in the top 5 on everybody's list.
Well, I mean, I get counter that a tiny bit.
Okay.
McCaffrey's going to be a top pick no matter what. But Elijah Mitchell's his vulture, and he vultured McCaffrey last week in the divisional round. I think Elijah Mitchell had 100 yards and McCaffrey may have had 50. And now McCaffrey's dealing with a calf injury. He'll play Sunday in the NFC Championship game, but you still got to deal with the running backs behind McCaffrey and the injury problem. So would I fade McCaffrey? No, but you know, he's obviously the workhorse there. Deebo Samuel, for all extensive purposes, probably had a down year compared to the year before. Yeah. Brandon Ayuk, there's just so many mouths to feed. And with Deebo on the field, George Kittle was dropping out of the top 5 just because of how complex the offense is. A guy like a Jennings, I forget his first name, could have a 100-yard game and 3 touchdowns, and the other skill position players could have really fantasy dud days. So I feel like from an NFL standpoint, the 49ers are super duper talented, but from a fantasy standpoint, I'm not really jumping for joy to go get a 49er like I would be going to get Justin Jefferson or TJ Hawkinson off Minnesota.
Fair enough.
So, Nick, I think one thing we can do in a future episode is maybe do our biggest fantasy takeaway from each team. Maybe
Yeah.
after the season, something like that. But I think my takeaway, at least from this game, is from the Seattle Seahawks, in that depending on whether they do a quarterback, could be very draftable. I know people wanted to fade both DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, and we kind of did before the season. And I think a lot of people were wrong, and they both had pretty good years. I think they both finished in the top 24 of wide receivers. I think Lockett may have finished right above DK. But in this game specifically, DK Metcalf, 10 receptions, 136 yards, 2 touchdowns. Kenneth Walker should be probably a top pick next year. I think he's going to be a little bit overdrafted, but still, he should be very productive. And Geno Smith, another pretty stellar game, 253 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. That's a solid fantasy day right there. So from a fantasy standpoint, I don't think you fade your Seahawks last year like you probably were this season. Moving on to the night game. Man, what a game this one was. The Los Angeles Chargers going into Jacksonville. They're up 27-0 at the half. So I kind of turned off this game. I think it was over, right? I mean, that's kind of how it went, I think. Am I right on that, Nick? Did the Chargers win?
Something happened.
Something happened. Man, Nick, if I turned off that game and went to bed, what did I miss?
You would have missed the greatest coaching collapse in the history of football.
Oh, the greatest coaching collapse.
Yes, greatest coaching collapse.
Mm-hmm. Greatest
Austin
coaching collapse.
Less than 10 carries in the second half of a playoff football game. You're up 20 points against a bad rushing defense. I don't know, bad decisions.
So if the running back was getting a lot of carries, then what did the quarterback do? If it's a good quarterback, you must have done something. It's not, I mean, unless
missing Mike Williams, Josh Palmer being a shell of himself, Gerald Everett couldn't create any separation.
Gerald Everett had 6 receptions, 109 yards, and a touchdown. So
most of it came in the first half, buddy. In the second half, he became a shell of himself.
Man, I love our little digs and takes on this show. If you guys that have listened for the entire season, I'm not a Justin Herbert guy. I think he's talented, but I don't think he's a winner by any means. And somebody made a really funny comment on Twitter that they've just replaced Phillip Rivers, and maybe, I don't know, Phillip Rivers, he stuffed the stat sheet like Herbert does. Rivers hasn't had a ton of playoff wins. I know he had that one season they went pretty far against the Pats. I think they maybe got injured that year. I don't know. But anyway, my point being, I love digging at Herbert a little bit. But it was a terrible collapse by Staley. Then they all backed Staley in the locker room, which I thought was absurd. I can't believe it. Doug Peterson, I think, is a pretty good head coach. I don't know why he didn't. We'll talk about the Kansas City game. I don't know why he didn't put more pressure on Mahomes after the ankle. That was a little weird. But anyway, what was your big takeaway from this one, at least from a fantasy perspective?
It's hard to give a true fantasy takeaway for this. But if I had to say anything, I think that Jags offense showed their ceiling. They showed their floor and they showed their ceiling in that game. They were miserable for half of football and looked like the best offense in football for the second half of the game. Next year, when they throw Calvin Ridley in that mix, it is going to be a crapshoot at wide receiver for who you want early on in drafts. But I will tell you the guy I will want. It'll be Trevor Lawrence. He's going to wind up going in between 8 and 10 and is going to finish in the top 5. Like I think he's going to have a target next year.
Yeah, I think that's a good take. My other big takeaway is that this Chargers offense will probably look much different next season. I don't know what Keenan Allen's contract looks like, but Mike Williams, when he's on the field, he's a top 15 wide receiver in the league probably, but there's a lot of games where he's not on the field for whatever reason. Austin Eckler was also, the running back one on the season, but didn't have a spectacular game. 35 yards, 2 touchdowns. The touchdowns are great, but I mean, he had 8 targets. I don't know where. He only caught 2 of them, but maybe they didn't use him correctly. But a blunder by the Chargers, and I think me and you may have both had the Chargers in our top 5 before the season. They were somewhere. We talked about them.
Mm-hmm.
So moving on to the next wild card game, we have the Miami Dolphins versus the Buffalo Bills. And here's another one for you, Nick. Tua wasn't playing. Teddy B wasn't playing. The game's in Buffalo. So, the Bills had to cover the spread, which was like 14 or 10 or something, I think. Like you had to bet the Bills in this one to cover that spread.
Mm-hmm.
Bills did not cover, and the Bills almost lost. The Bills are like a fumble away on that last offensive drive from losing that football game. So your big fantasy takeaway from this one?
This is going to be more of a football take, and I apologize to the fans at home wishing that they had a fantasy takeaway. Doug Peterson should not be a head coach anymore of that team.
Doug Peterson or Mike McDaniel?
Not Mike McDaniel.
McDermott?
Yeah. He absolutely deserves to not have a job. 5 years in with Josh Allen, has only gotten to a conference finals once with Brian Dable as OC. Brian Dable leaves. Offense doesn't look good. He's a defensive-minded coach. Defense couldn't stop a third-string quarterback from posting 30 on their heads. If I am the Buffalo Bills, and we already know the Chargers committed to Staley, I am absolutely sending a first and a second-round pick for Sean Payton this offseason. There is no doubt in my mind that if you put Josh Allen with that coach and Vic Fangio, who already agreed to be his DC wherever he goes, who made the Denver Broncos defense a top 5 defense in football, you put those two together on that team, that's how you win a Super Bowl. This coaching staff cannot get it done. They lost Dable. Josh Allen became a turnover machine. The defense, which was supposed to be elite back-to-back weeks, letting a team score more points than they should have. Cincinnati missing 3 of their starting offensive linemen absolutely slaughtered the Buffalo Bills. The defense could not stop them, could not get to the quarterback. It was a horrendous coaching performance. I think Brandon Staley and him, 2 guys that you might have thought had their job safe 2 weeks ago, I think both of them got to be fired from their teams or be looked to move for Sean Payton. I don't think they deserve a job anymore for their organizations.
I don't really want to give my Dolphins take right now. I'll give it a little bit later on in the show. But my Bills take overall from 2 games, that Gabriel Davis is exactly what we kind of said he was the entirety of the season. This game, 6 receptions, 113 yards, and a touchdown. The next game, I think he went 3 receptions for 40 yards or something like that, and they lost. So Gabriel Davis is the true boomer bust. He's in the same grouping as Juju, and if you draft him, you're playing best ball. He's what Tyler Lockett was 2 years ago, and he was why I avoided Tyler Lockett. He's not consistent. You're playing best ball. I think Gabriel Davis will be a great best ball player, but from a draft pick, he's one I probably won't target next year.
Yep.
The New York Giants at the Minnesota Vikings, in a game where everybody was picking against the Vikings and saying they were frauds, and the Vikings still went out there and proved that they were frauds. And the season ended so perfectly on a 4th and 9, and they threw a 5-yard route. Perfect. That's such a perfect way to end this season.
Yep.
Your big fantasy takeaway from this one?
So my big takeaway after the game, which was probably my overreaction Monday, was that Daniel Jones proved to be a franchise quarterback. He looked really good. I thought he was a much better quarterback than I've ever seen from him. There were people saying he's better than Kyler Murray, which I thought was totally fair after seeing Kyler Murray's year and seeing.
Yeah, I think he's a better quarterback than Kyler Murray. Maybe not a better NFL player, if that makes sense. I think he plays the position.
I can see that. But I thought Daniel Jones looked really good. I thought that offense looked really good. I thought they had a real shot to walk into Philly and pull off the upset, but then they proved the next week, and I don't know if we're going to get into divisional games, but they proved that they did not belong.
We'll get into them, but I think that's a testament to how good Philly is. I think my big takeaway is Justin Jefferson didn't have a great game, and he ended the season not great. He had the blunder in the fantasy championship against the Packers, and then this one. And I don't know if it's a Justin Jefferson issue, if it's a Kirk Cousins issue, because in these games that he's not playing well, Kirk Cousins also isn't playing well, but Kirk still had 273, 2 touchdowns. So I don't know if this is a scheming issue or if it's a Justin Jefferson issue, but if I'm the Vikings, I think you had a lot of pieces around you, and you kind of got to decide at some point, like, are we going to win a Super Bowl with Kirk Cousins? And the answer has to be no. From a fantasy standpoint, though, I think Daniel Jones has to be drafted higher than, like, if I told you could pick one right now for next year, Dak Prescott or Daniel Jones on your fantasy team?
Daniel Jones.
His
rushing ability is so much improved.
Okay. What about Daniel Jones or Kirk Cousins?
Yeah, it's Danny Dimes. I think he clears that.
Daniel Jones or Lamar Jackson?
It depends on where Lamar is. If he stays in Baltimore. I'd still lean Lamar, but the injuries scare me. Okay. Like per their ADP, right? Like Daniel Jones is not going to be drafted in the top 10 quarterbacks. I'd want his ADP. Okay. I wouldn't want Lamar, who's going to go top 5, top 7 again.
Okay. The Baltimore Ravens versus the Cincinnati Bengals in a Bengals scare game. I wasn't shocked about this game. To me, it was a divisional matchup, which always gets tricky. They just play them the week before. I think that makes things a lot tougher. But what was your big takeaway from this one, if you have any?
I think we both said, and I think we said it off the air, that like we both took the Bengals, but we wouldn't be surprised if the the Ravens pulled off an upset, even with Huntley.
I didn't think they were going to win. I thought it'd be close. I didn't think it was going to be
Like we wouldn't be
a shootout.
surprised.
I would have been surprised if the Bengals lost, but the score itself and the game didn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, I mean, they had the weird situation. Huntley fumbles on the 1 yard line. They take it back 99 yards. Like it looked fluky to me, like what happened. But I mean, that's, I mean, the real takeaway is, like, I don't think the Ravens really need Lamar as much as everybody makes it out to be. Like, they competed with the toughest team in their division. Some people have called the Bengals the best team in the AFC for the past 7, 8, 9 weeks. So they're hanging it up there with a lack of weapons, a lack of quarterback. Like, I don't think they need Lamar as much as they make it out to be.
I think the issue is they structured their roster around Lamar, and then Lamar's not there anymore. So I think that's a problem they'll have to address. Monday Night Football, the Dallas Cowboys go into Raymond James to face the Tampa Bay Bucks. The last time we called them the Tampa Bay Bucks. This is a slaughtering, man. This was bad.
Yeah, that was
and like the fantasy numbers aren't crazy here. I mean, you have Schultz had the best game, 795, 2 touchdowns. CD had a decent day too, 468, 1. The running backs are okay. I mean, Pollard had 77, Zeke 27. Dak had an awesome day, 305, 4 touchdowns. But it was a slaughtering. It was an ass whooping. That's really what it was. Chris Godwin had a good day. Mike Evans had a decent day, but like it was still like it was an ass whooping. This is exactly, I think, what we've seen from these teams this entire season. And Brady still had 350 and 2 touchdowns, which is nuts to me. So it did not. I didn't think he had those kind of stats.
I didn't think he had those numbers.
That's why fantasy's so weird. That he would have had a 20-point plus fantasy day.
Yep.
Your big takeaway from this one?
Most underrated coach in football is Mike McCarthy. I've been on the Mike McCarthy train for a few years.
Do you know Mike McCarthy's like playoff record is like the same as Sean Payton's?
Oh, that's kind of surprising to hear, actually.
It's close to it. I saw the numbers on one of the morning shows one day. They're close. They're very comparable. They aren't far off.
Yeah, I mean, Mike McCarthy, I mean, you can say what you want. With Green Bay, he was out there winning. With Dallas, he's had back-to-back 12-win years. None of the position groups are elite. His GM, owner, Dr. Jerry Jones, traded away Amari Cooper for chump change, and you saw the lack of talent in the second round of the playoffs. But Mike McCarthy's an underrated coach. That team knows how to score. That team knows how to put up points, and they're still going to be it's a fantasy crapshoot, but they're another team, like I said, with San Fran, where I think you are going to want a piece of that offense, no matter who it is, outside of Dak.
My big takeaway from the Bucs is that I really don't want a Bucs running back, next year. And as for the receivers, like I don't know who's going to play quarterback for them, so that one's going to have to be addressed. Moving on to the divisional round, Kansas City Chiefs versus those Jacksonville Jaguars. I don't have a big takeaway from this one, except for the fact that the Jags are a good team. They're not a great team. They're not going to compete with these top dogs in the AFC. I think that's totally okay. But I mean, the receivers are great. I mean, you look here, Zay Jones, 583, no touchdowns, is still 13 points. Christian Kirk, 752, 1, that's 17 points. And you have Evan Ingram at tight end, 5 for 31. Travis Etienne, 62 yards and a touchdown. So the skill position players, I think, proved both in the playoffs and the regular season that Jags are very draftable, but I think you're also playing a crapshoot with them. And I'm not sure what Christian Kirk's ADP is going to be, but I think I'd almost rather gamble on a Zay Jones than a Christian Kirk if they're like 4 rounds apart.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, my big takeaway has kind of been it for the whole year. But it was really reinforced. I mean, Travis Kelce is one of the safest picks. Well, yeah, I think he had 14 catches and broke the record or tied the record for most.
He had 14 catches, 98 yards, and 2 touchdowns. I'm doing my playoff fantasy format by hand, and he had 35 fantasy points.
I think that there is a very realistic take of Travis Kelce 101 next year because he was on the most fantasy teams that won the fantasy championship this year. So
it's just so easy. You set him in your lineup, and you're almost guaranteed 20 points from the tight end slot. It's so easy.
I think I won't do that, but I mean, if you're at the end of the first round, I think he's a lock for your pick.
The Giants at the Eagles. Again, this is just
mollywopped.
This is just like there's great, and then there's there, good/there. The Eagles they're an elite football team, and the Giants, they were happy to be there.
Yep. I couldn't have said it better myself.
My one takeaway here, I do want to mention this one. Mr. Miles Sanders had 90 rushing yards, but still got outcarried by Kenneth Gainwell. And then 3 rushing players scored touchdowns: Jalen Hurts, Boston Scott, and Kenneth Gainwell, not Miles Sanders. So
keep it on trend, baby.
Yep, he's the man. He's the man. Going into Sunday, the Bengals at the Bills. The score says 27-10. The game I watched felt like 49-3.
Yeah.
It didn't feel close.
It was not a close game.
And I think if you watch this game without logos and without players, like, I know it sounds crazy, but like when they were up like 17-3 or whatever it was, like, it still felt close because of Josh Allen and the Bills, but it was never close. And that's just the crazy part of like the expectation there. But
do you want to know who you saw in that game? You literally watched the Giants from last year playing as the Buffalo Bills. It was like the imposter syndrome. Like, it was literally like watching the same exact organization, and the only difference, the only thing that flipped was Brian Dable leaving that team. And I have been a bigger Josh Allen supporter over the last few years. I told Nick this in our group chat. Like, Joe Burrow has surpassed Josh Allen as the second best quarterback in football.
I think Burrow's the best player of the quarterback position in the league, if that makes sense.
I can't go that far yet.
I think he's a better quarterback than Mahomes in the sense that he's more accurate, he's more poised, he makes less mistakes, he throws less interceptable balls. He's a better quarterback than Mahomes. Mahomes is more talented, probably has a better system around him, and plays to those abilities and plays expertly to those abilities.
I mean, I don't know about you, but if I were Patrick Mahomes, I would much rather have Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, and Joe Mixon. I know he has Travis Kelce, but I don't know, man.
I think if he flipped the two, nothing's really much different. But he's been in a great system his entire career.
I mean, that's fair, and you could say Burrow has been in a great system under Zach Taylor, which I think is a shock. But
yeah, but I feel like Burrow is exactly what you want in a quarterback, and Mahomes is what you want in a quarterback plus this insane athletic ability and talent, and it's almost like a superhuman.
I guess I want to check the interception numbers because you did say that, and they did have the same amount of interceptions.
But Mahomes has led the league in interceptable balls for like 3 years. I've never seen a player throw more balls that were dropped.
He's also led the league in touchdown 3 of his 5 years.
But I'm saying he throws more risky passes that get.
He also did have 5,200 passing yards this year.
What did Burrow have? Burrow wasn't too far behind.
He had 4,400, so 800 less yards.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I'm not saying
if Burrow wins a Super Bowl, then listen, it's a real conversation, but that's got to happen first for me.
Yeah, what if Mahomes goes to the Super Bowl and loses again? Then he's 1-2 in Super Bowls.
He's hosted 5 straight AFC Championship games. It'd be really hard for me to flip off the Mahomes best quarterback in football.
That's another conversation for another day. But anyway, I think we said enough about that game. Let's move on. No, I guess that's enough at that point.
Yeah.
All right. The Cowboys at the 49ers. Dak's in the same conversation with Kirk Cousins where they're just like, you're in purgatory if you're paying one of these guys at this point. That's just kind of where you are. Our guy Tony Pollard unfortunately went out with an injury, and that kind of sucks. I don't know what the Dallas running back room is going to look like next year. But my big takeaway is, I want Tony Pollard wherever he's playing next year. He's an injury. It's going to keep him out for about 3 months, but I still want Tony Pollard, wherever he plays next year.
I think that's a fair take. I mean, I like Pollard. I feel like I didn't learn much from the game outside of, we knew Dallas was not trustable. We knew high ceiling, low floor.
Yeah.
That's exactly what they showed you. And we knew San Francisco was going to out-talent anyone, no matter how Brock Purdy played.
Yep, that's fair. All right, moving on to our 2022 Fantasy Football Awards. We have, 12 awards here, something like that.
14.
14. Or 14 awards. We're going to tell you who we picked and give an explanation. So, Nick, who is your rising star for the 2022 fantasy football season?
I had a couple people in mind, but I settled on somebody that I did not believe in before the year and made me a believer halfway through and then executed and finished well down the stretch. I went with
I think we
Justin
have the same one.
Fields.
Oh, you want Fields? Okay, so we don't have the same one.
Justin
That's good.
Fields. He finished as a QB6 on the year. He had a 9-game stretch over 17 points. During that stretch, he only had one game under 60 rushing yards. He had 7 rushing touchdowns during that stretch. And it's kind of the same thing I said about Lance. Like, it doesn't matter how he plays as a football player. His production, his workload, his ability to run the ball, no matter what, will give him good fantasy numbers. And it proved it by finishing as a QB6. If he played the entire year and was healthy, he missed a game down the stretch, he would have finished in the top 4. So I think he's going to be targeted in a lot of places next year.
I chose Trevor Lawrence. He finishes the quarterback 7. I think he was kind of undrafted in most leagues going into the season. And I wrote that he got better as the season went on. His first 10 games, 5 games over 15 fantasy points, which is pretty solid. Last 7 games, he had 5 games over 15 fantasy points, with 3 of those games being over 20. He also looked really good in the playoffs, obviously. He didn't play bad against Kansas City. He didn't play his best game, though. Christian Kirk dropped that one, deep ball, and Agnew also fumbled, so that, would have hurt the stat line. Next year, he will have Calvin Ridley. I don't exactly know how it's going to change the team, but it's another weapon, and I think he's only going to get better. I think the team only gets better. I think they gel more. They hit their stride, and yeah, I think he's going to be, I'm not saying he's the best NFL quarterback from a fantasy standpoint. I think I'd take him over, guys like Kirk Cousins, guys like Daniel Jones, guys, Dak Prescott. I think I'd rather chase the upside of Trevor Lawrence than those guys. Next award we have is the 1-year wonder. I wonder if we have the same one for any of these. I'm curious. So
yeah, we do not know who each other's recipients are.
Yeah. Who do you got?
Last year, so the way I thought about this was last year, who was like the guy where I was like, yeah, there's no way that they deserve this ADP. Like, they're being overdrafted because they had a monster year, or like an outlier statistic. And nothing speaks better to the man that I think the fans love in Jamal Williams.
Yes,
we love him
yes, we have the same one. Yep.
We love him, but let's be honest. He broke Barry Sanders' single-season touchdown record, 17 points, averaging 1 per week over the year. He's literally going to be James Conner. He'll be drafted inside the top 3 rounds.
That's my note. That is my note. There you go.
And he's going to fall.
He did finish as the running back 13, and he had 1,000 rushing yards, so still impressive. And the Lions will be a really fun team to watch. But yeah, that's my 1-year wonder. I can't see Jamal Williams replicating that kind of season, and because of that season, his ADP is going to have to rise. So I think that's what really comes down to, is where his ADP is going to be. But like, I'm sure him and Swift are going to be a lot closer to each other than we think, and I think I'd rather have the upside of Swift almost. So I'm taking both of them, as crazy as it sounds. So. Okay, moving on. Most improved player. This is almost like rising star, but not rising star. So what do you got?
Yeah, I went for another year 2 player. He's someone I wanted to fit on this list when I was thinking about awards, and this kind of spoke to it because I did not expect him to look as good as he did this year. I went with Ramondre Stevenson, running back.
Thought about it. That's a good one.
Last year, he had 700 yards in total. This year, he put up 1,400 total yards. He had 55 more catches. He had 10 straight double-digit games. He struggled during your fantasy playoffs, but overall, he had a very impressive season, and I don't see any reason why you wouldn't draft him when he finally has an offensive coordinator next year.
Does he? Bill O'Brien?
Bill O'Brien was a good offensive coordinator 2 years ago. Mac Jones looked phenomenal there.
I hate Bill O'Brien. I can't use the phrase that me and my friends use about Bill O'Brien on the air, but he's Bill O'Brien. Mine is TJ Hawkinson. This is why I didn't really want to say much when we talk about the playoffs, but after being traded to the Minnesota Vikings, 6 out of those last 10 games, he had over double-digit fantasy points. He finishes the tight end 2 on the season, ahead of guys like Mark Andrews, George Kittle, Darren Waller, etc. He had over 5 targets in all games, except for week 18, and week 18 does not count. So, he was averaging 6 or more targets in each of those games with the Vikings. And in the playoff game, they lost to the Giants, but he had 10 receptions for like 120 yards. He has chemistry with Kirk Cousins. He's talented, and I just don't see that going anywhere. And I don't know where his ADP is, but I would rather take the chance on TJ Hawkinson than any other tight end next year, not named Travis Kelce. And I think that's a really fair take. So that's why, to me, he became the most improved player. If you had him on your team whether you drafted him as a flyer or whatever, you reap the rewards of it for sure. Biggest headache.
So I almost put an entire franchise on this because there was one team out of every team that I don't think annoyed me more this entire football season. But I had to go with their tight end. I went Kyle Pitts / the entire Atlanta Falcons organization.
I did not think you were going to say the Falcons, but this is a really good one. I like this one. This is good.
What do you think? The Bengals were my biggest headache of the year?
I'm not going to say. It might have been the Bengals, and I'm not going to say. You'll find out in a couple minutes.
Okay. So my biggest headache, Kyle Pitts, drafted ADP tight end 3, finished the year as a tight end 33. He only had one game over 14 points. 7 of his 10 games were under 10, and 6 of those 10 games were under 5 points. I wanted to put him on the no-fly list, but I had to be honest with myself. When I see him sitting in the 8th round,
you're going to take a fly on him.
No way I'm not pulling the trigger on him next year.
That's why I traded for him this year. I figured he's still Kyle Pitts.
Exactly.
All right. My biggest headache is DeAndre Swift. You drafted him in your top 12. He finishes the running back 21. First 2 weeks of the season, he looks good, but Jamal Williams is vulturing him for touchdowns, and then he gets hurt. Comes back, I think he gets hurt again, getting vultured by Jamal Williams. So now you're battling, that he loses time to Jamal Williams, both snaps, carries, etc., and he was hurt. And there are people on our show every week, should I play DeAndre Swift? I can't trust him. So that's why, to me, he was a big, big headache for fantasy managers.
I agree with that. I thought about putting him there too.
Comeback player of the year.
I think there were only 2 candidates that really popped up in my head, maybe 3. But I went with Christian McCaffrey. A lot of people.
Other 2?
I'm sorry?
Who were the other 2?
Geno Smith or Saquon Barkley.
Didn't write back. I also have McCaffrey as mine, by the way.
So CMC, everybody kind of faded him and said, you can't trust him because of the injuries.
Missed 19 games in 2 years, I believe.
He played 10 games over 2 seasons, which was 33 games in total. So he missed a lot of time.
13, 23. My math is off, I think. 23, I think, is the number he would have missed.
23 games. This year, he played all 17. He was traded halfway through the year.
And played that week.
And put up almost 2,000 total yards between both of them. He did play that week. He had 13 total touchdowns, and he only had 2 games this entire year under 13 fantasy points. I think he had a monster year. He proved why he deserved to be the 101, even though he did finish as the RB2 on the year. But he was spectacular, and I'm happy for him. He's such a good dude, and he's been plagued by injuries and gets a lot of hate for not being able to stay healthy, and he put together a healthy year.
I also wrote he had 12 games over 15 fantasy points, and his playoffs are 25, 13, and 31. I did fade him before the year, and he was on my do not draft list because of the injuries, but I was wrong, and I'll admit that I was wrong. So congrats to him. I have also learned that, as injury prone as a player is, you should probably just trust the talent if you do, because injuries can happen to anybody like Jonathan Taylor. So let's move on. Our next award is Draft Day Steal. What do you got?
I went with Josh Jacobs here.
Oh, we got the same one. I wish we didn't have the same one for this one, because there were a couple really good ones.
Yeah, I agree. But he finished as the RB3 on the season. His ADP very early on was the RB21. He had very poor coaching last year with Gruden. He picked up a lot of steam after he left. He ended up finishing the year with over 2,000 all-purpose yards, 50 catches, and 12 touchdowns. He had double-digit carries in every single game this season. So we have another award later on called Mr. Consistency. I think that he would be another prime candidate for that one. But there was no bigger steal in the draft, in my opinion.
I also want to note he had 20 carries in 9 games. In those 9 games, he averaged over 20 points. I don't know how many of those games the Raiders won, but they probably got most of those wins in those games. That's why I was banging the desk at Josh McDaniels to give him 20 freaking carries. I would also like to note Christian Kirk was a big steal. I think he was in round 7 or 8, and I think he finished in the top 15, and both Seahawks receivers probably were steals as well.
Yeah.
Next award, we have Mr. We
might have the same one here too, but I put Travis Kelce.
Travis Kelce, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
one game under 10 points, 7.6 against Cincinnati. Cincinnati seems to be the only team that can actually shut him down. We'll see if they can do it on Sunday, but in 3 games against the Bengals in the past calendar year, I don't know what his numbers are, but they're not great. Like, they're really not. 12 games over 15 fantasy points, 7 of those over 20. Like, he's just said it. You just put him in your lineup and just enjoy it. Like, that's really what it is. I don't think there's any player in the league that's like that. Like, Jefferson was great, McCaffrey was great, etc. But I just don't think there's a player like this. So just like, you set him and he's good for 15.
Just to add on to that point, he had 100 more points than the tight end 2 in full PPR. The gap between the tight end 2 and the tight end 20 was 100 points. So
yeah,
you want to talk about just high ceiling and consistency
dominance
out of the most inconsistent position of fantasy football. I mean, it proves why Travis Kelce is the only tight end that should be drafted in the first, second, and maybe even the third round.
Yep. All right. No fly zone, a player you do not want to touch next year. Nick, who is one player at this very moment you don't want to touch next year that could change in the next?
It could change because their quarterback could change, but as of right now, I have them on the no fly zone. I went with DJ Moore. I almost put him as the biggest headache, but I did not roster him, so I couldn't put. He did not give me a headache.
He gave us headaches. He definitely gave us headaches answering questions.
100%. But he didn't give me a headache from his performance on the field. So outside of the playoffs, he only had one time he had back-to-back games over 11 fantasy points. He had 8 games under 8, and you couldn't trust him up until the playoffs. And then in the playoffs, he winded up putting up like 60 or 70 total points between the 3 games. So DJ Moore, I mean, Mr. Inconsistency, couldn't trust him at any point of the year. And the one time by the time you couldn't trust him, it was too. He gave you a lot of points, but he was probably on your bench because there was no way you could trust him with Sam Darnold and 4th-string quarterbacks cycling in and out of there.
So this is why I didn't want to give my Dolphins take, and it's going to be Jalen Waddle. And I hate to say it because I've been on the Jalen Waddle train for a while. And here's my points against Jalen Waddle. My first is his ADP is going to be high. I think his ADP this year was maybe around 4. Well, he had a better season statistically, so he's probably going to be around 2 or 3 guy. He's probably drafted in your top 25. So now you could be, this year, for example, T. Higgins was drafted right around A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown had a better season than T. Higgins statistically, and T. Higgins didn't even have a bad year. But if you go back today, you'd rather have A.J. Brown than T. Higgins. I feel like we'll have the same conversation in a year's time where maybe Jalen Waddle's drafted next to Christian Kirk or DK Metcalf, and one of those number ones has a better year than him. So first off, I don't like the ADP, potential ADP. Second off, he's not the number one on his team. Third of all, his quarterback's health is in question. Tua Tagovailoa had 3 separate concussions this year, really 2, but it's 3. Waddle played 4 games without Tua. In 3 of those, he had under 10 points. In the playoff game, the first round of the playoffs, he had 3 receptions, 44 yards. That would only be 7.4 fantasy points. Dolphins will also be playing in a tough division. Bill Belichick's defenses are always good. Jets' defense is elite. Bills, they were not healthy, and, to cut the Bills a little bit of slack, like, they lost Von Miller, they lost their safety early on, they lost a corner, like, they did lose a bunch of key pieces. So the Bills, I think, still have a good defense and can reload that defense. So with that said, I think there's a lot of factors working against Waddle, and knowing what the ADP is going to be, he's not going to be a guy that I target next year unless he's slipping to rounds 5 or 6. And I don't see that happening for a player that's that talented. I'd even rather take like Terry McLaurin, even knowing the situation over there at quarterback, than Jalen Waddle next year. So moving on, Rookie of the Year.
I was in between both my Jets, Breece Hall, who went down in the 5th or 6th week of the year, and was the top 4 running back on the entire season up until that point, and Garrett Wilson, who will win Offensive Rookie of the Year. But I settled on neither. He is the heavy favorite at the moment, so it does look like he is going to win it.
I don't want to bet against Vegas, so then you're probably right.
But I did not go with him. I went with my real opinion because I am a truth teller. I know I got my Jets hat, my Sauce Gardner sweatshirt on, but Chris Olave, for fantasy purposes, was the Rookie of the Year. He put up 1,000 yards on the season. He missed 2 total games and still managed to put that up. And he had 11 games over double-digit points, including a 7-game stretch over 10, where he saw 3 different starting quarterbacks in that time. For a rookie, that is very impressive. And Garrett Wilson, while I do think he was a better wide receiver on the year, his inconsistency for fantasy did not make him trustable. Where Olave, you felt like you were going to get 10 solid points every
I do want to defend your guy real quick. It's not his inconsistency. It's the Jets offense quarterback inconsistency that kind of hurt him. You could be a great wide receiver, but there's only so many wide receivers that can overcome multiple quarterback changes and bad quarterback changes. At least with the Saints, Andy Dalton is he's a quarterback. He's a pro quarterback that's been in the league for 12 years. I'm not saying he's great, but that's something you could kind of overcome. Whereas, you're throwing out Flacco and Zach Wilson. That's asking for it.
Wyatt and Chris Trevler. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a little bit of a homer here. I'm going with Kenneth Walker. No, I'm not just because I'm a homer. I'll take my Seahawks merchandise off for a second. So Kenneth Walker didn't really get a full workload until week 5. Those first 4 games, he had the hernia injury. I think he missed week 1 and 2. Then he maybe 3 or 2 points playing behind Rashad Penny. His first full workload, Rashad Penny goes out in the Saints game with I forget what his injury was, maybe a fibula or something, and he scores 14 fantasy points. After that, he only missed 1.5 games because he got injured in a game, so missed half a game and missed another game. So that means he played a total of, I think, 12 games or something like that. He had double digits in every other game, and in 6 of those, over 14 fantasy points. So very consistent. The running back position is also a position of need. As good as Olave is on my dynasty team, as good as Garrett Wilson is, spectacular. Receivers you could probably find off the waiver wire if you need a flex play. You're not finding a waiver wire off the waiver, a running back off the waiver wire of this caliber. And if you did get Kenneth Walker off your waiver wire, people dropped him like this dummy over here did in a league or two, then you probably got yourself a league winner on your team, especially with the injuries going down the stretch. So with all that said, I think he deserves that Rookie of the Year award, I guess. Do I think his play was spectacular? No, I see flaws with all of these rookies. I see the quarterback play of Olave and Garrett Wilson both stifling them. Kenneth Walker didn't catch enough balls for me to say that I'm confident in drafting him in my top 20 next year. But if I was ranking these guys in ADP right now, I think Kenneth Walker is probably in the top 25. I think you'll find both of those receivers maybe from 25 to 50, depending on exactly the changes that happen in both organizations. But I don't think either of those are cracking the top 25, whereas Kenneth Walker being positioned in need is going to get a little bit of a bump. So I know I probably shouldn't throw the position in there, but I feel like for fantasy, you have to kind of, put that in there as well. And he was helping his team win games. A receiver can only do so much, but he was, helped his team win some games too, which is nice. Waiver wire champion. It could be maybe Nick's is Kenneth Walker. It's not mine. But who is your waiver wire champion?
It's got to be Jerick McKinnon.
We picked the same one for this one too.
He had a 5-game stretch, including all 3 playoff games, where he put up 14, 32, 34, 13, 23. He had 6 straight games with receiving touchdowns, and he was rostered he was one of the 10 most rostered players on people that won fantasy championships.
Yep.
So we always say you win your league on the waiver wire. In a league or in a season where I felt like where both of us felt like the waiver wire was really weak, he winded up being the guy that prevailed out of all of them.
Yeah. The waiver wire stunk this year. Like it really did. I can't name a bunch of guys that I'm like, even in my dynasty league, like I look at my dynasty league right now and I'll tell you the waiver wire guys that I'm looking to keep. Like last season, I got some guys off the waivers. Like I kept Allen Robinson, which is a big, I don't have Allen Robinson on any of these lists. How? Oh, I should have put him on bust of the year now that I think about it. I totally forgot about him.
I really thought about putting him on bust of the year.
He was so bad. I totally forgot that he even existed. I forgot he was an NFL player. Jesus. I'm looking at my dynasty team right now. Let's see if anybody from waivers that I'd actually keep next year. Joshua Palmer, maybe, depending on that situation, but no, like there's nobody that I picked off of waivers that I'd even want to keep. So I mean that tells you something right there. Bust of the year. Who is your bust of the year? You said it's not Allen Robinson. I kind of wish I had made mine Allen Robinson because I was struggling a little bit on bust of the year, and like I just totally forgot he existed. I dropped him after week 5, and I forgot he was a thing.
Let's hear your bust of the year first.
The Denver Broncos.
Okay, nice. I like that.
The Denver Broncos as an entire team. Jerry Jeudy gets a slight pass, but the Denver Broncos, they're a bust. Russell Wilson, I think, was drafted as like the 9th quarterback off the board in most leagues. Finishes the quarterback 16, which isn't a huge drop off, but still with the expectations there, was pretty bad. I don't think we were playing Russell Wilson down the stretch, and if you were, you were in like a super duper flex league or something. All the running backs were either hurt, cut, or busts. Javonte Williams, even before getting hurt, was being used on only 45% of snaps, which is freaking absurd. Thank you, Nathaniel Hackett. Courtland Sutton, who was drafted in the top 5 rounds, probably as the wide receiver, maybe 29, something like that. Ended up being the wide receiver 43. It was probably dropped later on in the season. But they had a bright spot. They had the Denver Broncos defense, who was very trustable until you played him in your semifinal game and Baker Mayfield dropped a big old dookie right on their face. So even the Denver Broncos defense is a bust. So the Denver Broncos, you are a bust team for 2022 for real life and for fantasy. Thank you for the number 5 pick, though. I'm going to enjoy the NFL draft depends on who they pick, but I could enjoy the NFL draft for the first time in many, many years. I probably won't. I hate everybody that they pick. I really do. I hate
beautiful take.
I hate all their picks that they take, but you know what? The offensive lineman that they took last year was great. He was good this year, and I was happy about that.
Look, the Seahawks have had the best NFL draft that they've had since Russell Wilson's draft class. Like they have, honestly. My favorite quote before the year was the 101 is an absolute lock, and for me, he was the biggest bust on the year, and I don't think it was close. Jonathan Taylor. 101, everybody said you have to take him because of CMC's injury history. Well, newsflash, on a live stream, I took CMC right before Jonathan Taylor. You can go backtrack if you'd like to check it out yourself. But Jonathan Taylor, Mr. 101, finished as the RB 33 on the season. I know you can blame injuries. They happen to everybody. But in the 12 games that he played, in 12
the Colts also suck. Like, the Colts are really bad.
It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. He deserved the bust of the year.
My no-fly list next year is Colts, Texans, and like I'm just gonna have a team of Falcons. Like I'm just gonna have teams of no-fly lists at this point.
So in the 12 games that he played, 4 of them he scored under 10 points. More than half of his games he scored under 15, and that is horrendous for the number 101 pick. Here are some running backs that average more fantasy points per game, and these are I have 5 guys that everybody either said fade, trust, or felt really poor about at some point or throughout the duration of the season. Zeke averaged more points than him. Najee Harris averaged more points than him. DeAndre Swift averaged more points than him. James Conner averaged more points than him. Leonard Fournette averaged more points than him. I have no clue where he's going to be drafted next year. It's probably inside the top 10.
He'll be in the top 10.
He only averaged 12 points per game on the year. It is going to be incredibly hard not to take him in the top 10, but I do not see how you have other guys like a Josh Jacobs or like a Dalvin Cook or one of those guys that's going to be at that ADP after this poor performance, because it's not like he played well when he was out there. He did not play well. CMC, even when he got hurt, those years he was a lock for 20 points per game, and he was putting in Jonathan Taylor was averaging pretty much half of that on the entire course.
No, I think you make a good take. I do want to defend him a tiny bit. The line was pretty banged up. The quarterback play was horrendous. The coaching was really, really bad. And Taylor got banged up a couple of times. So was he a bust? Yes. But am I jumping up to fade him next year? Not necessarily. I am fading every running back next year. That's for sure. I don't really want to go deep into running backs. Because how many of these running backs are really outscoring wide receivers? Even you just mentioned Dalvin Cook. He was a headache this year. It was tough for him to get like 15 fantasy points.
Yeah. He
wasn't getting close to 100 yards, and he wasn't catching more than 2 balls a game. And he didn't even play bad. Like watching him, he didn't even play bad and didn't have any injuries. Kamara was a disappointment this year. Fournette, like Fournette finished like top 15 or top 12, and he looked horrible this year from what I could tell.
I have a great question for you.
Yeah.
It's the end of the first round. On the board, Jonathan Taylor, Tony Pollard, still in Dallas. Who are you taking?
Who are my receivers on the board?
I don't know. Who would you take if you were taking a running back?
I don't want to take a running back. I'm taking Travis Kelce.
Okay.
I'm taking Travis Kelce, and I'm taking a receiver.
Okay. They're both available in the third round, hypothetically. You are a
Who's playing quarterback for the Colts?
We don't know who's going to be playing quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys.
It's going to be Dak.
It's going to be Dak, but it shouldn't be Dak. Let's say it's
I need to know who's playing quarterback for the Colts.
Derek Carr.
Jonathan Taylor.
Jimmy Garoppolo.
Jonathan Taylor.
Okay. I would take Tony Pollard.
Okay. I mean, Jonathan Taylor just had like close to 2,000 rushing yards like a season and a half ago.
So
and like 20 touchdowns.
One-hit wonder. And I was the one that said last year.
But he wasn't a one-hit wonder. He had back-to-back good seasons. He had back-to-back seasons where he was in the top 10.
He was just the RB5, and then he finished as the RB1. So,
yes, he's a two-hit wonder.
Listen, I love Jonathan Taylor. I said take him one-on-one last year.
I don't think he's the problem there, though. I think if they plug a couple of those holes, he's fantasy relevant. But let me ask you this. Like, do you want Dameon Pierce next year? Because I don't.
I would take Dameon Pierce. His ADP is going to be in between third and fifth round.
Probably, but that team's going to be a mess. Okay, let's move on now. I think we have our MVP. So who is your MVP of the fantasy season?
I think we have the same guy, and I know you were a little higher on him than I was this year, so you can go first.
You have Justin Jefferson.
Of course.
Yeah. So this was the guy that I crowned MVP before the season. Wide receiver 1. 7 games at 29 points or more. I had to put 29 because he had one game at 29.5, which is basically 30, but still, I wanted to say 7 games over 30, which is freaking. This is an ESPN standard scoring, by the way. No bonuses, no nothing. In me and Nick's league, he probably averaged like 35 points a game, and in standard, probably 25. Only 3 games over double digits. I think those were the games where Kirk Cousins absolutely crapped the bed. I think against the Eagles, the Packers, and one more. He also had 12 games over 15 fantasy points. Just an absolute tank. I know he disappointed in your fantasy championship, but I don't want to harp on that because, the fantasy playoffs are an anomaly of sorts. And that's why, like, in me and Nick's league that we split, the prize money goes, I think it's technically 65% to the champion and 35% to the points winner. And I like that a lot because if you score the most points in the entire season, you probably have the best fantasy team. You can't draft Justin Jefferson and then he has a really bad matchup and then just trade him for the championship. You just can't do that. Like it's not logical. And it happens sometimes. And that's just kind of what happened with Justin Jefferson. Not a him problem. Kirk Cousins stunk big time. The Packers whopped them around. Like, it happens. And it sucked. It sucks that it reflects Justin Jefferson, and maybe some people that lost their championship will have a bad taste in their mouth when this guy was averaging over 25 a week and got them to the championship. That's just how it goes sometimes, and that just sucks. So that's why I don't always love where, the champion gets like all the money, and it's like, well, you kind of got lucky with the matchup sometimes. So anyway, I don't want him to get flacked for that. He was still the MVP in my books. Awesome player, awesome season.
I also have Justin Jefferson just to aid Nick a little bit more. He had 9 games over 25. He did have the 7 over 29.5 points. He had 11 games over 11 targets, and he had 10 games over 100 yards. In my opinion, the only debate for the one-on-one next year should be Justin Jefferson and CMC. I'm sure Eckler will sneak in that conversation again, but with Elijah Mitchell vulturing and Austin Eckler's inefficiency, I can't see not taking Justin Jefferson at the one-on-one. I know it's unconventional, but for me, I don't care anymore. I'll pull the trigger because I know he's going to put up more fantasy points.
Yeah.
It's the most likely to put up the most fantasy points.
So for our last 2 awards, Nick, I would like to know what you think your worst take of the year was.
So I had a lot of bad takes this year, right? Everybody has some bad.
And that's what everybody has. If you do fantasy, you have a lot of bad takes, and hopefully you have a lot of good takes too. But I think you're more wrong than you're right. Whether you're Matthew Berry, Fabiano, Fantasy Pros guys, I think you're more wrong than you're right because it's predicting, and you could predict on everything, and a lot of stuff's not going to go your way. So and you can't and. You want to be a little bit bold, not super duper bold to the point where you sound dumb, but like, you don't want to just be like, oh, my bold take is that Christian McCaffrey is going to have a great year. Well, congrats, dude. Like, you said something pretty obvious. So I do want to give us some slack here that, you're going to have bad takes. Anyway, we both have bad takes. So Nick, what do you think your worst take of the year was?
Well, I'm going to give you the 2 honorable mentions real quick. First off, Saquon Barkley outside the top 20 did not look like he missed a step. The other one, Miles Sanders, should not be touched. Miles Sanders had a close to a top 10 year, if not in the top 10. But the worst take of all, the one that I kept pounding the desk on, the one I would not fade off of, Courtland Sutton will outscore Davante Adams on the entire season. The reason I picked this one wasn't because Courtland Sutton played well and Adams played well, or because both played poorly. It's because I got both polar opposite. Davante Adams finished in the top 3 wide receivers on the year. Courtland Sutton and that Broncos offense looked absolutely horrendous. I mean, listen, it was one of my worst takes. And the worst part is halfway through the year, I doubled down and said I would continue riding this. I continued to let's ride, and I fell off the horse because of how terrible this take was.
Now, here's the thing. If you took Jerry Jeudy's last 6 games and compare them to Davante Adams, they were probably better. Besides that one monster game from Adams, I'm sure Jerry Jeudy outscored him in those last 6 games or so. But I mean, Nick backed it up. Like, I understand the point, but I just didn't agree with it. So I mean, I don't have honorable mentions, but off the top of my head, I was fading Austin Eckler. I said he was not going to score as many touchdowns. I forget exactly everything I said, but yeah. So that was a bad take by me to fade Austin Eckler. But I mean, I definitely had 1 or 2 other really bad takes, but probably a lot of bad takes, but that's one that comes to mind. I didn't have honorable mentions, but the one I have here is that I did not have Amon-Ra St. Brown in my top 24 when we did our 24 wide receiver ranking. And the thing was, I don't know why, maybe because he was a Lion or whatever. I don't know. I don't have a reason for it. It's back in August. I don't have a good reason, honestly.
It was because he was a Lion.
That's probably why. And then when drafts kept on creeping closer and closer, I started to get on the Amon-Ra train, and then the team that I went 13-1 on had Amon-Ra. So that was he finished wide receiver 7, and he wasn't in my top 24. So that was a bad take on my part. What do you think was your best take of 2022?
Now, I had a lot less great takes than I did poor takes, but there is one that I said, and I had to go back and listen to the audio because I wanted my exact quote for it.
Sure.
And it had to do with Josh Jacobs' ADP being criminally low. No one liked Josh Jacobs before the year. They did not like him with Josh McDaniels. They said he does not get enough targets for a running back. He doesn't get enough passing game. And I said, no, Josh Jacobs had 50 catches last year. He was pretty much an 1,000-yard rusher if he stayed healthy. And he's got an offensive coach from a system that likes to run the ball. My exact words on the episode was, his floor is a high-end RB2. His ceiling is the RB5 on the year, and I rank him as number 10, just above Ezekiel Elliott, because I think that he has a much better offense. It winded up that he finishes the RB3, blew out my ceiling for what I thought he could do, and winded up being, as I said earlier, the absolute steal of the draft.
Yeah, that's an awesome take. You did good on that one. My take, which is kind of interesting because I did not have him in my top 24 wide receivers, but my breakout receiver of the year was Devontae Smith. It was one of the first few episodes we did. I think we did like MVP, bust, breakout, and sleeper. He was either my sleeper or my breakout. I forget which one it was. I did not have the time to go and pull up the audio like Nick did. I've had a busy few days, but I do remember the take, and I could pull it up if I needed to back it up. Well, Devontae Smith was drafted around 7 to 9. I said he was going to be my breakout / sleeper. I didn't draft him anywhere, so dummy on me for not listening to me. He finished at the wide receiver 9. Crushed that ADP, like just absolutely crushed. Exactly, where he was supposed to be in. Kind of like Waddle and Tyreek. I don't know where his ADP is going to be, but just looking at his numbers here, he had the goose egg week 1. Don't know why. It was a bad game. 4 other games under 10. But then down the stretch, his last 6 games, so 5 of them were your last 5 weeks of the fantasy season. 21, 17, and this is your fantasy playoffs. 17, 31, 20, 13. And he wasn't just a back half of the season guy, because in his first 6 games, he had 4 of them over 15 fantasy points. Awesome season for Devontae Smith. The Eagles' offense isn't going anywhere. I drafted him in rounds 3 or 4. I think him, T. Higgins, Waddle, they're all kind of around the ADPs together next year, and they should all have really good years, depending on Tua's health. The other two probably have really good years. So I think that was probably my best take. And if you listen to me and drafted Devontae Smith, you probably had a really solid wide receiver 2 for your season. And I did not listen to me, and that's why you trust your gut. So yeah. Thank you guys for listening to this show. This is fun. We'll have a lot of other off-season content coming your way over the next few weeks. If you enjoyed this show and you're listening/watching on YouTube, please drop a like on this video and share that link with your friends. We'd love for you guys to listen and let us know what you think of this show and any other content that you may want to see in the off-season. You could let us know. The best way to let us know, though, is by going to our social media channels, PrimeTimeFFPod, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, Primetime Fantasy Podcast. Please let us know exactly what you'd like to see from us in the offseason. We'll keep pumping out that content for you. Thank you so much for listening, guys. We will talk to you soon. Enjoy the conference championship games this Sunday.